What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix for Week 15 of the 2021 CFL season. I'm Ryan Coop here with your wide receiver preview this time around. If you missed it, go back and check out the quarterback and running back previews I released yesterday. And stay tuned later today. I'll have a defense preview as well. And on Friday, I will have depth chart updates for all of the games this week and help get you set for locking in your lineup for the week. Let's take a look at the receivers for the week. There's 4 games on the schedule, 2 Friday night, 2 Saturday. And let's dive right in and start with games on Friday and take a look team by team here at the options at receiver. It starts off with Hamilton and Toronto, big East Division matchup Friday night between these two teams. And let's look at the Ticats receivers first of all. I think there are a couple good options here once again for you. Hamilton's been on a bit of a roll offensively in recent weeks, and while last week some of these guys had a bit more of down performances, they have still been fairly consistent. Let's go top down price wise. And start off with Brandon Banks. He's at $10,220 is his price. To get 2.5 points per $1,000 out of him, you need 25.6. I'm saying stay away from Banks. Last week, he finally had his breakout game of 2021, something we've been waiting for all season. Did lead the team in receiving by a good margin and put up 22.1 points. But that was his best game of the year. The price is still so high. I think the 25.6 is still such a high total to hit. I need to see another week of that from Banks before I even bump him up to a yellow light at that price point, because he is still only averaging 11.3 points per game on the year. I'm saying yellow light, be cautious. Maybe it's a good pick, maybe it's not. On Jalen Acklin this week, $6,480, 16.2 is the total you want to get at least from him. Averaging 10.3 points on the year per game. Last week was a down week for him. 2.5 points was all he put up last week. The 3 games before that were 21.6, 15.8, and 13.5. So he's had some success as of late with Jeremiah Mazzoli at quarterback, but the last game was a bit of a disappointment, and he's had that at different times throughout this year where he's had his solid games, but he's also had ones where he's put up under 5 points multiple times. So I say be a bit cautious there, but I think it could still be a good pick. I do think the matchup with Toronto is pretty good. The Argos do give up a good amount of passing yards a game, and if the offense is rolling here, I think it could be a good day for a couple receivers, at least for Hamilton. And I think 2 of those guys are Stephen Dunbar Jr. and Tim White. They come at pretty similar price points of kind of low 5,000s. Dunbar Jr. averaging 11.3 per game on the year. Tim White 11.2, so they're neck and neck there. A couple points shy of their 2.5 point per $1,000 thresholds. Let's talk about Dunbar Jr. first. Last week, just 6.6 points for him against BC, but in the 3 games before that, or really in the 5 games before that, over 10 points in each of those. So he's been fairly consistent in a lot of weeks, and I still like him this week, even if the last one was a bit of a letdown slightly. And I mean, it was a letdown, but he still put up 6.6 points. He was only a couple off his value there. Same thing with Tim White. Last week, 9.3 points, so he was just short of his value by about 3 points there. In the 2 games before that, 11.4 and 21.8. Tim White plays his best when Braylon Addison is not available in the lineup, which is the case once again this week, and I still do like him for a bounce-back game. Banks was the big contributor last week out of seemingly out of nowhere, given this season's trend. I expect that to even out a little bit more, which should mean more targets and more success for these 2 guys here. I'm saying stay away, red light on David Unger and Tyler Ternowski. Neither of them have produced in the games they've played this year very meaningful numbers to be worth putting in your fantasy lineup. Taking a look at the other side of this matchup, the Toronto Argonauts, a couple interesting plays here. At the top price-wise, you have Ricky Collins Jr. and Davaris Daniels. I'm saying yellow light on both of these guys for largely the same reason, is that they seem to be hit and miss, and and it's hard to say yes, let's lock them in because they are disappointments at times with the performances they deliver. So Collins Jr. averaging 10.8 points on the year. Last week he put up 10.4. Game before that 3.9. So in his last 6 games, he's had 3 over 10 points and 3 of 6 are under. That to me spells good game, bad game. You don't know what you're going to get from him. So if you want to take a chance, you could get rewarded, but you could also be burned a little bit there. Same thing, Devaris Daniels has been a solid contributor in a couple games in a row here. 17.1 and 19.4 in his last 2 games. Almost actually made me want to put Daniels as a green light option for the week, but in his 4 games before that, 11.4 was his highest total, and he had even some under 6 points. So it's much the same. He's had a couple good games in a row, but we've also seen his fair share of disappointments at a $6,000 price. So I say stay away, or I say be cautious on Daniels this week. I also think it's a tough matchup. The Ticats have a very good defense, so it could be a tough matchup there. Chandler Worthy, earlier this year was one of my favorite go-to options at receiver, but I think that's dialed back now. We see him seemingly in a backup role at receiver a lot of games so that he can focus on return duties. So $5,985 price point. You're looking for 15 points out of him. He's only hit that once in his last 5 games. His last 3 games have all been under 10 points. So I say stay away from Worthy. I think there are other good options at similar prices. And one of those is Curly Gittens Jr., who is a lock for me this week, a green light option. 3 of his last 4 games, he has crushed his value. 17.5, 19.6, 9.4, and 16.8 in his last 4 games. Even when, McLeod Bethel Thompson seems to not quite have been, hitting his stride in the past few weeks. He's still been finding Gittens Jr. For big yardage and big touchdowns. And that's what I like to see from a guy in the lineup. He's still at a decent price, I think, given his recent production, and should be a guy to put in your lineup once again this week. Jawan Breskison made his return to the Toronto lineup for the first time since week 2 last week. Only put up 3.1 points in that performance. I'm saying stay away there. 3 games this year, he's averaged 4.4. I had big hopes for him coming into the season, but need to see proper usage in that offense before I can suggest going the way of Jawan Breskison. Dejon Brissett, most weeks is in a backup role. I think maybe he got the start last week, but just zero points for him in that one. I'm saying green light to Drez Anderson because he had at a $2,500 salary. He had a big game last week, put up 12 points. In his first start the week before, he put up 4. But the common theme between these two is he's gotten a fair share of targets his way, which is something you like to see. They haven't completed all of them necessarily. There's been a couple, missed communications there. But if you're getting a $2,500 receiver that's getting his fair share of targets on a consistent basis, if Anderson is in the starting lineup again, which I imagine he would be this week, I do like him as a play as your cheap value receiver. I think there's definitely something to be had there. This should be a well-contested matchup between Toronto and Hamilton, and you could find some success at a cheap play there. Saying red light on Tommy Neild. He had 1 start and did not put up any points there for the Argos, and didn't play last week, so I imagine he may be out of the lineup again with Jawan Breskison back in it. Take a look at the second game. Calgary and BC, a big West Division playoff matchup here. Start with Calgary. Yes, I'm saying red light on every receiver on the Stampeders this week. And it's the reason I do so is because it's such a timeshare. You don't see a single receiver consistently week after week lead Calgary in receiving. Maybe it's Kamar Jordan. It probably is Kamar Jordan. But his price is so high, even that's not worth it. Like, Kamar Jordan's not putting you up 27 points on a week. Besides, he had 1 week earlier this year where he had a monster game. And other than that, it's hard to know who's going to get the ball. They have 2 or 3 backups in each game as well that take their fair share of reps. And you now have the added complexity of Reggie Bagleton has rejoined the team, was their leading receiver in 2019, and is now going to be back in the lineup for the first time this year after re-signing with them a couple weeks ago. So you have to imagine he's going to get the fair share of targets going his way. I think his price is ridiculous for a guy playing his first game of the year back with the team. Yes, I know what Bagleton's capable of after watching how well he played in 2019, but how many receivers are hitting 30-point weeks? I think it's happened like 3 times this year. He's way overpriced, I think, for the first start. I think Kamar Jordan's overpriced as well. They're just not hitting that value. I'd be shocked if they were this week, especially given, Bo Levi Mitchell isn't exactly lighting it up this season. So in a lot of weeks, there haven't been a ton of passing yards to go around for the team, which is why I am a little bit cautious here and just saying just stay away from any of these options for Calgary at receiver. I think there are better teams to lean on when it comes to the passing game. And, if you want to lean on anything for Calgary, lean on the run game. Lean on Kadeem Carey. But I don't love any of the options at receiver here this week. On the BC side of things, there's none here that are a lock to me, but there are some potential intriguing plays. I don't like the play of Brian Burnham again this week, with his price being at over $10,000. A lot of the same of what I've mentioned with Brandon Banks, with Kamar Jordan, is that it's just tough to produce such a high number from any receiver, really. I mean, Burnham in his last 2 games, 20.6 and 14.7. Those have been pretty solid performances. 4 of his last 5 games have been 14.5 or more. But if you're getting that, you get a kind of nice floor, but at the value you're spending, you could be better spending your money elsewhere. So I say stay away from Brian Burnham. You also have to remember that Calgary has, in the second half of the year, had one of the better pass defenses in the CFL. So there may not be a ton of yardage to go around here, or catches, or touchdowns to go around here for the BC receivers. Lucky Whitehead is a yellow light to me. I think there is a play there. We saw him really get involved once again for the first time since being back from injury last week against Hamilton. He put up 19.6 points. You need him to hit 23.3 to hit value. He has done that a couple of times earlier this season, 3 times this year, in fact. 2 times he's come within over 2 points per $1,000, which is still not bad value, even if you don't hit the full mark there. So he is a big game receiver, and I think if BC, their playoff hopes are on the line here, I feel like they are going to lean on Whitehead as they have done when they've had success this season. But I am a little concerned just because the price is so high, just because the matchup with that Calgary defense this week. I'm cautious on Whitehead at such a high price point. I think you should stay away from Devere Posey. He played 1 game against Winnipeg a couple weeks ago and was scratched last game. Even if he is in the lineup, I need to see a game from him in this lineup before, a real solid production before I recommend him at almost $7,000. Dominic Rhymes is another yellow light for me. Earlier this year, dismal start to the year for him. Then he was injured for a long time. The past 2 games, he's put up 18.8 and 6.7. So average those out, you're looking at about a 12, 13 points per game, which is really close to the value you're looking for from him. So I think there is potential there. They've put him back in the lineup. They've taken a couple guys out. Devere Posey's been out. Lamar Durant's been out. Keon Hatcher's been out the past couple of games, which has kind of made Rhymes be a go-to option behind Burnham and Whitehead. And this is a former 1,000-yard receiver, so I think there is intriguing play there. I'm still cautious, though, for the same reason I've mentioned with some of these other guys, due to the matchup this week. And his low production earlier this season. Javon Catoy, I think you should stay away from. In his past 6-7 games, he's had 1 game over 10 points. All of his other ones have been underneath that. including 0 and 4.8 in his past 2. So I loved him as an option earlier this year, but he's not getting the usage anymore. Shaq Johnson hits the yellow light category for possibly the first time this season for me, and that's because they've really gotten him involved in the last 2 games. 8.8 and 11.1 were his totals in those 2, which does feel a little bit promising, but I can't go and say lock him in because the 4 games before that, he totaled just 3 points in that span. So be a little cautious there, but if you're looking for a cheaper play, perhaps that is one available to you. Also saying yellow light on Keon Hatcher. I mean, if he's in the starting lineup and he's getting used properly, he still is one of my favorite cheap value play receivers. He's averaging 8.4 points a game, which is the 3rd best among BC receivers, and is over the 2.5 points per thousand mark of 7.9 for his value. But he has been out of the lineup. According to the injury report, it's been due to a healthy scratch the past couple of games. So that's the reason I put him as yellow light is, be cautious because he may not play. And if he does play with some of these other guys back in the lineup, will it be in a starting role? If he does start, I think I like it at that price. But if not, then of course stay away there. Jacob Scarfoni, Quadri Henderson, stay away from either of those 2. Henderson was handling kick return duties last week, did not get involved in the offense, and put up just 2.3 points. Scarfoni has been kind of a backup, here and there rotating into a starting role, but hasn't produced anything particularly this season. Getting into the Saturday games, we have a couple rematches from the week before, and it starts off with Winnipeg and Montreal in Montreal this week. Quick note on the Bombers. It was announced this week that Sean McGuire will be getting the start at quarterback for the team in place of Zach Collaros, so they'll be resting Collaros to get him, keep him healthy for the playoffs, and McGuire gets his chance to start, which, by the way, as I mentioned on Twitter this week, I really, really love McGuire as a $5,000 starting running back who loves to run the ball. Sounds pretty good play there to me. But what does that mean for the receivers? It means that I'm cautious on pretty much all of them this week because we really haven't seen McGuire throw a ton of passes, so that's hard to know what to expect there. It's also hard to know how they're going to balance the workload for Winnipeg's receivers this week and who else is all going to be resting for the team as they kind of they've locked their first place up already. They're getting ready for the playoffs. They don't want anybody to get injured this week. So Kenny Lawler's the most expensive at almost $10,000. Last week, he was the leading receiver for Winnipeg, put up 18.1 points. Game before that, 15.9. Game before that, 11.2. And that was his 3 games back since he faced that 1-game suspension from the team. So he's put at least 10 points on the board for you in all of those and is kind of their go-to receiver and is closing in on a 1,000-yard season. But at such a high price, if all of a sudden, let's say they do, rest him for part of this game or the unknowns of Sean McGuire, I'm skeptical on hitting that total. Could be a good play this week, but I don't know if he's hitting you. I don't think he's hitting you that value. So I say be cautious on Lawler. Same thing, Nick Dembski. You need 18.9 points from him at his price. He's averaged 14.5 on the year. Last 3 games for him, 3.9, 12.5, and 14.9. So most weeks, outside of that 3.9, he's got a pretty good floor, but his price is a little bit high for me to lock putting him in the lineup. He seems to be kind of touchdown dependent a lot of times. Doesn't get 10 catches, say, in a game the way Lawler does at times. So I'd say be cautious on Dembski. Rashid Bailey last week put up 8.6. In the 2 games before that, 22.5 and 14.4. Last week was the first time in 5-6 games he's put up under 10 points. I like Bailey a little more than these other 2 options again this week, just because, if they're going to start resting their leading receivers, they can't rest everyone, obviously. So I think Lawler and Dembski would maybe get that nod. Maybe a veteran like Darvin Adams before Bailey does. I could see him being in the lineup for the whole game, which could lead to more targets his way. But the same cautionary tale I've already mentioned with these other guys exists there. I don't like the option of Darvin Adams because his 4 of his last 5 games he's put up under 5 points. He had 13.3 against BC a couple weeks ago, but other than that, everything's been under 5 points as of late. So he does have the flashes to occasionally put you a good value up, but more often than not, you are vastly disappointed by Darvin Adams, so I don't like that play there. Drew Wolotarski moves up to a yellow light for me for the first time in a while because he's gotten decent usage in recent weeks. 3 of his last 5 games, he's put up basically 8 points or more. 7.9 a couple weeks ago, so just shy of that. But then 3 of his last 6, he's also put up under 5. So hit and miss, kind of the same category I mentioned with Ricky Collins and DeVaris Daniels earlier. You might get good value out of him. And half the time you're getting very disappointing value. If some of these other guys do get rested, I could see a little more leaning on Wolotarski, which could be a good week for him there, which makes him actually kind of an intriguing guy to put in the lineup this week, but it is still a cautionary tale. Janarian Grant will start presumably at kick returner again this week. If some of these other guys are resting, may get into the starting offense a little bit as well. We'll have to check what the depth chart looks like and monitor what the team's saying about who's going to play, who's not. He's averaging 5.8 points a game on the year. Last 3 games have been 5.5, 14.5, and 4.4. So a little bit shy, besides that one where he got the touchdown on the value you want, but there could be a play there as a cheap receiver still. And kick returner, I just wouldn't lock it in as an absolute lock. Looking at the Montreal side of things, I think you should stay away this week from Eugene Lewis and Jake Weineke. Because they are pretty high-priced receivers, and they had the tough matchup with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense. Eugene Lewis last week put up 7.4 points. He had a big game against Toronto a few games ago where he put up 34.6, but other than that, in his last 5 games, he had a 16.4, which wasn't bad, but he had a 6.5, a 10.5, and a 7.4 as well. The matchup with Winnipeg is tough. I don't recommend putting a receiver in at that high of a price. They did score a couple touchdowns against the Bombers last week, but I expect that to course correct back to the norm, which is I think Montreal's going to need to lean on the run game here a little bit. Jake Weineke is a lot cheaper, so I like that play a little bit more. Last week put up 16 points, was the leading receiver for Montreal, but in the 2 games before that, it kind of disappeared a little bit at 0 and 4.4. So much the same. I think tough matchup to spend a big dollar value on. I'd say stay away from either of those 2 guys this week. Quan Bray is a yellow light for me, though, because $5,701. He's a lot cheaper than the other 2 options, and I feel like he's had a bit of chemistry with Trevor Harris in recent weeks. We know Trevor Harris, I think, has been announced as the starter again. We'll confirm once the depth charts come out, but should be starting again this week for Montreal. And in the past 2 games where we've seen Harris get some playing time, 6.6, 10.4, we've seen a decent bit of chemistry between those 2 guys, and that 6.6, a large part of that came in the second half when Harris took over for Schultz in that game. So I could see there being some connection there between this quarterback and receiver, which makes it potentially an intriguing play. If you do want to go for one of those bigger name Montreal receivers this week, Quan Bray could be the one to do so, but he is averaging just 8.1 on the year and has had his fair share of disappointments as well. So be cautious. Be very cautious. I'd say this is a very close yellow or red light here. It's not a green light by any stretch of the margin. I don't like the play of either Dante Absher or Keon Julian Grant. They don't get very much usage in the offense. But I do like the best option here for Montreal being Reggie White Jr., who is still $2,500 and has put up good performances in back-to-back weeks, 12.4 and 7.6 in his past two games. Did get a touchdown there against the Bombers last week. And what do you have to lose at 2,500? Even against a stingy defense, 6.3 points is 3 catches for 33 yards. I think that's something he can do. And he's been making plays, and if his value continues to be this low, I continue to mention him as a lock to put in your lineup. Finally, getting the final game of the week, the Edmonton Elks and the Saskatchewan Roughriders face each other once again this week. It'll be interesting to see what the Elks lineup looks like, because last week they did miss Greg Ellingson and Darrell Walker, but they did get Armonte Edwards back from injury for his first game. I don't like any of these higher priced receivers for Edmonton. They did have a good game. Cornelius had a very good game last week. But the Riders also do have a pretty strong defense. Don't give up a ton of points. So I'm cautious on that regard. And so I think the best way to go here is to the cheaper available options at receiver. Ellingson has missed last game due to injury. In his past couple games before that, he did have 17.1 the game before, but 6.9 and 10.1 in games before that. He's been largely inconsistent. Armonte Edwards hasn't produced anything really in the 3 games he's played this year. Just 4.4 points for him last game. Darrell Walker has been a big disappointment this year. His price continues to drop, which makes it maybe a little more tempting for not this week, but the week after, where he plays 2 games, although I'm sure they'll adjust the prices accordingly there. But in his past 5 games, his highest total has been 7.4 points. It's been a much disappointing season for Darrell Walker, and you should stay away there this week for him fantasy-wise. Tavon Smith was one of the receivers who got in the starting lineup last week, but did put up just 2.7 points. Last 4 games have all been under 5 for him. Shai Ross is a potential play for me. He hasn't, most weeks hasn't really lit it up necessarily, but he's averaged 8 points a game on the year, and put up 8 last week, put up 8.1 2 games ago. If you're still missing some of those bigger options at receiver like Ellingson and Walker, I like Ross to step up and be more involved in the offense again. It seems like there is a bit of a connection between Taylor Cornelius and him. So I do like him as a potential play this week. Again, always got to be cautious on any Edmonton receiver. But Ross, I think, is one of the best options available there. Stay away from Mike Jones. Last week, even though, Ellingson, Walker, etc. were out of the lineup, Jones did not return to the form from earlier this season. Put up just 4.9 points there. Was not worth your value. Ernest Edwards, if he does get into the lineup, probably more so as a backup role. Probably not worth playing there. I do like Jalen Tolliver potentially as a play if he gets the start. Last week he put up 11.5 points. We've seen him kind of, on the year rotate in and out. Even when he was in a backup role, he still got a couple reps, put up 3-4 points in those games. The price is really low, and he seems to be a receiver they like to at least use a little bit each game, no matter what. So I think there is potential play there for Jalen Tolliver. And then finally, the most interesting option here for Edmonton is Danny Vandervoort, who put up, didn't put anything up all season long. I don't even think had a catch until this game, and all of a sudden broke out for 3 catches, 50-something yards, and 2 touchdowns. Maybe tempting to go his direction based on that, at $2,500. But this is a guy who didn't really get usage all year coming in. So show me if he can show me. Tell you what, if he shows me that he has a good performance again this week and gives you value, I would lock him in potentially for Week 16, where they do have 2 games, but not sold necessarily on that one performance last week from Vandervoort. And finally, looking at the Saskatchewan Roughriders, some interesting options to talk about here. Duke Williams and Shaq Evans, both since rejoining the team or joining the team for the first time in Williams' case, have not produced the fantasy points you've wanted out of them. It's been kind of a disappointment. Williams, in the 3 games he's played, has produced under 10 points in all of those. His salary is really high. I think it's tough to hit that 22 based on his usage. Shaq Evans did have his best game since returning from injury last week and put up 11.1. His salary's dropped a little bit, which makes him a little more intriguing, but also really hasn't lit it up in recent games. And surprisingly enough, the receivers that have had the best success in the past number of weeks, which we expected to be these 2 big pieces they got back into the lineup, it's actually been guys like Braden Lenius, who is a more intriguing play here. $4,039. You need 10.1 points out of him. 2 of his last 3 games he's produced more than that. 13.4, 2.6, and 12.9. Lenius has been one of the more consistent receivers on the season at hitting his value, and I think has the potential to do that again this week. Same thing with Keon Schaefer-Baker, 3,892. Last week he hit 13.5 points. We've seen him be a guy that's been able to put big performances up this year. Besides, Kyron Moore, I think maybe had a bigger average, but is out for the rest of the way. Schaefer-Baker is their leading average receiver at averaging 9.9 points a game. He did have a couple disappointing weeks before this last one, but was kind of more in a backup role, at least for one of those games. I think he is a potential play here. It's kind of interesting. Lenius is that guy who's never going to break you the big week, but is going to hit you your value, whereas Schaefer-Baker is that guy that is a pretty cheap option at receiver, but can hit you monster values if you get the pick right on that one. So they kind of complement each other in that regard. Ricardo Lewis, the price is still pretty low. And he's had some good performances, but last week 0 points from Ricardo Lewis. So if he put up a good game, and it would have been 3-4 good games in a row for him, I would lock him in as a green light option at a cheap price. But last week was a 0. That concerns me a little bit there. Say Mitchell Picton, Justin McInnis. I think either of these will be out of the lineup or in a backup role. I don't like either option. And Rashard Davis did put up 6.6 points against Edmonton last week in a return role. And Edmonton is a team that does give up a decent amount in kick returns, which makes me say yellow light on Rashard Davis. I think there could be a play there. In his 3 games he's played, 3.1, 3.2, and 6.6. You always know there's going to be kickoffs or punts, and those are going to be returned. So for $2,500, you have the cheap floor there. But I don't think he's going to necessarily break you a massive game this week either. So I say yellow light in that direction. And, with this matchup against Edmonton, you also have to remember with all of these guys, and big reason why I don't green light any of them, is because Edmonton actually does have one of the better pass defenses in the CFL. So that's something to keep in mind there. So those are your options at receiver for this week. A tough week really to recommend any lock-in green light options. I think you do have a couple, from Toronto and Hamilton that are good because that should be a close game. I think there's a good value play in Reggie White Jr. as well. But for the rest of them, I see it as we get down to the stretch here, next week's going to be tough as well to really find guys with, teams resting for the playoffs or playing for next year, finding guys to lock in your lineup. So I think there are good potential plays, a lot of yellow light options that are close to green lights that maybe bump up to that once we see the depth charts come out this week. So make sure you stay tuned on Friday. I will have your depth chart updates. You can find all of the depth charts. I tweet them out as well at CooperTrooper42. So you can get a quick access to those there when they come out. And stay tuned later today. I'll have your defensive preview out too. We'll talk about the defensive options for week number 15. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't. If you have any fantasy questions, put them in the comment section or tweet them at me at CooperTrooper42 on Twitter. Link to that's in the video description. And if you want to play CFL Fantasy alongside myself and other viewers, you can also check the description. There's a link there to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix group over on the official CFL Fantasy site. And you can play alongside myself and other viewers this week and the rest of the 2021 season. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.